The Virology Institute also conducted research on intermediate horseshoe bats, the ones that were not sold at the wet market. South China University scientists concluded that the coronavirus pandemic, the one that people are dying from here, likely came from one of these two government labs in Wuhan. They noticed that a scientist at the Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention had been exposed to the blood and urine of horseshoe bats. They also suggested that infected tissue samples from research animals may have wound up in the Wuhan wet market. That was 16 days ago. We've taken an awful lot of abuse for airing that segment. From the very beginning, there were theories that the Wuhan coronavirus originated in a laboratory. We covered those repeatedly on the show, including what you just saw. But from the beginning, most of the press treated that as a conspiracy theory. China denies it. It must be true. Turns out, though, there is real evidence, and it's accumulating really quickly, that this pandemic came from a lab in Wuhan. Fox's special reporter has spoken with multiple sources in the U.S. government, highly informed sources who've been briefed on China's early actions during this pandemic. Those sources say that from the beginning, Chinese authorities knew that this virus escaped from a laboratory. Those authorities silenced physicians and journalists in China and then ordered viral samples to be destroyed. The wet market theory was made up whole cloth as a distraction to muddy the waters and avoid the blame. As we reported on this show, 59 separate people who used the Wuhan wet market said intermediate horseshoe bats were not for sale there. They were hundreds of miles away, the closest colonies of those bats. It was a lie, apparently. And it was a lie that cost this world trillions of dollars and many thousands of lives. Gordon Chang is author of The Coming Collapse of China. He joins us tonight. Gordon, thanks so much for coming on. So as we just noted, high-level U.S. government sources confirmed that they believe this virus escaped from either the Wuhan Institute of Virology or the other lab in Wuhan. Do you think that's plausible?
Yeah, it's not only plausible, it's probable. There was an article in The Lancet, which is the authoritative British medical journal. I think it was posted January 24, which said about a third of the initial cases had no connection with the Wuhan wet market that everyone talked about. That means that there had to be another source for this. And when you look at Wuhan, obviously that Wuhan Institute of Virology is at the top of the list of suspects. And by the way, Tucker, China reopened wet markets about a week ago. And that's a real indication that Beijing thought that, or that Beijing knew that the wet markets were not the source of the coronavirus epidemic.
So let me ask you, since this was always a plausible, in my view, a likely explanation for what happened, and again, I just want to restate, apparently it was accidental, not intentional. We don't know, but that seems likely. Given that it was always a real possibility, why did our medical establishment in this country scramble from day one to deny that that could ever have happened? The head of NIH sent a special memo saying, we've looked into it, there's no chance, it's disgusting anyone would claim this about the government of China. Why were our officials, including the head of NIH, covering for China?
I think that there are a couple factors at work. One of them is that the release of from the lab is just unthinkable. And that would call into question all of these biolabs around the world. Remember, this was a P4 facility. It had the highest level of security. And so if you had an accident there, just imagine what people would be saying about labs around the world. But also, I think that there was a sense that they were working with China. They didn't want to get China upset. We've seen, many American officials use this general approach, and it hasn't worked in the past. And obviously, it hasn't worked now, Tucker.
It's just shocking. Do you think our own health authority, first of all, do you think it would be worthwhile for everyone who dismissed this out of hand as crazy and attacked the people who raised the possibility? Maybe it would be time for them to apologize for their behavior, account for it, and start some real reporting on this question, because it's a significant question. It actually matters.
Yeah, it matters. It's very consequential. And I think what this really says is that all of our policymakers, all of our analysts, our academics really need to go back and question their assumptions about what happened. Yes. And in general, the way they view China. because clearly we have been getting it wrong for a long time. And now this has had consequences which are just disastrous. We are going to bury many Americans because of this.
That's exactly right. They should be questioning their assumptions. That's something we should all do every single day. After our morning cup of coffee and calisthenics, question your assumptions because reality changes fast. Gordon Chang, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Maybe the feeling that our media are covering for China, maybe they care more about that country than our own. Well, it's no coincidence you might feel that way. Years ago, Michael Bloomberg openly conceded, he admitted that his news operation censored itself to placate the Chinese Communist Party. Now we have details on just how far Bloomberg was willing to go. In 2013, Bloomberg News reporters were working on a piece about the massive wealth accumulated by leading Communist Party officials. The story never ran, and the reporters who wrote it were silenced. Now, National Public Radio has obtained internal Bloomberg audio recordings from 2013. In this recording, then editor-in-chief Matthew Winkler kills the story, he admits, purely to keep China happy. Listen to this.
It is for sure going to, invite the Communist Party to, completely shut us down and kick us out of the country. So I just don't see that as a story that is justified.
Yeah. So business imperatives came before telling the truth. Not surprising. Meanwhile, CNN, just this Monday, posted what is literally Chinese propaganda as a news story. And when we say literally, we mean it literally. The article was headlined, China's PLA Navy is controlling coronavirus and aircraft carriers deployment proves it, report says. What was that report? It was a press release from one of China's many propaganda publications. What is going on here? Dana Perino may know the answer. She hosts the Daily Briefing with Dana Perino, and we're happy to have her on tonight. Dana, great to see you. So all of a sudden, I guess it seems if you paid attention, I'm not sure I do either, other than maybe the obvious one, and I'm at fault here too. Why didn't we notice this earlier? We kind of knew that all these companies and news organizations were in bed with a country that hates us, but nobody said anything about it until recently. Why?
Well, I think that's painting it with too broad a brush. I mean, first of all, look, it was NPR that is reporting on the Bloomberg story. And one of the things that's happened that the Bloomberg yes. And so, okay, those are Americans, and we have a system that is so much different and so much better than China in so many ways. Our founding fathers were brilliant. The First Amendment was first for a reason. Freedom of speech, assembly, and freedom of the press. So I think what's interesting, too, is that Bloomberg, as a news organization, remember, even in our own country, they were ridiculed because they were told that the reporters could not cover the presidential campaign of Mike Bloomberg, which felt very un-American and unprincipled. And many news organizations have had these fights with China. In fact, our sister company, or cousin company, whatever we're calling it, the Wall Street Journal, recently had people kicked out of that country because the Chinese Communist Party was very upset about a headline of an opinion piece because they can't take any sort of dissent. And they worry every night. You know what keeps President Xi up at night is any sort of dissent, any sort of people actually expressing their individual thoughts and desires. And if that goes in contrary to what they want, then they actually have the economic muscle to show it. And news organizations aren't the only ones. Remember, the Houston Rockets got in a lot of trouble and had to walk back support of Hong Kong protesters with like a mild support of Hong Kong protesters being allowed to express themselves. So there's a lot of compromising that has been going on with American companies and news organizations, et cetera, in order to do business in China and to report in China.